In this video, we will go over what a class and an ID is. A class is an attribute that can be applied to any element as many times as you want. An element can have multiple classes. The purpose of a class is to apply a CSS rule to a specific element or elements that contain that class. In the example shown, I have a series of paragraph elements. Some of the paragraph elements have a class of blue font applied to them. Those with the class of blue font have a font with the color blue, while the others do not. This is an example of a class. Any element that has a class of blue font will get the blue font rule applied to it. The class is not restricted to just a paragraph element. In the following example, I have the class of blue font applied to a variety of block level and inline elements. As long as the elements have that class, the rules of that class will apply to the element. As stated before, we can also apply multiple classes to the same element or elements. In this example, I have three classes. One is the blue font class. The other are the classes font 35 pix and font 25 pix. Notice I have applied two classes to two of the elements. One class changes the color, the other class changes the font size. By adding two or more classes to an element, you can create a bunch of classes and add the ones you need to create the presentation you want. This is a common way front-end frameworks like Bootstrap are constructed. They allow the coder to plug in whatever classes they need. It is important to understand how the class is written for HTML and CSS. If it is HTML, the class is the attribute named class and the value is a name you assign to the class. In the CSS, the class name will be preceded by a dot. It is very common for students to mix up the syntax, so it is important to understand how they are written. An ID is a unique identifier that is specified using the ID attribute, which can be used with any element. Unlike a class, which can be applied unlimited times, a given ID can only be specified once per HTML document. This is because it is a unique identifier. Specifying the same ID twice or more in the same HTML page would prevent it from being unique. The following example shows the correct way to apply an ID. Notice I have three IDs, but each ID value is different. As long as the ID attribute values are different, then there is no problem. However, you cannot have two or more ID attributes with the same value on the same page. This example shows the incorrect way to use an ID. Notice that two of the IDs have the same value, thus they are not unique. Also note at how the ID is written for HTML using the ID attribute. When written for CSS, it uses a pound sign, otherwise known as a hash. So to recap, the main points when dealing with classes are: classes can be applied to any element. When writing a class in CSS, write a period and then the class name. When writing a class in HTML, use the class attribute and then the class value, or the name of the class as the value. You can have multiple classes assigned to an element. You can have the same class multiple times on the same HTML page. The main points with using an ID are: IDs can be applied to any element. When writing an ID in CSS, write a hash or pound sign and then the ID name. When writing an ID in HTML, use the ID attribute and the value will be the name of the ID. Only one ID can be assigned to an element. You can have only one ID with the same value per page. That concludes this lesson on classes and IDs.